So we're dealing with questions of kind of possible, dubious, borderline changes of usage. And we're also dealing with this question of yiush, of giving up hope. And we've said that once the owner gives up hope of retrieving an object and it changes domain, at that point, ownership of the object has changed. So the mentality of the original owner is really quite crucial. Has he given up hope or not? And in the third Mishnah of the 10th chapter, the Mishnah picks up this theme with another borderline case. Hamakir kelav or svarav beyad acher. Someone recognizes his utensils or his stuff or his books in the hands of somebody else. Really interesting, by the way, in terms of the mental map of the Mishnah, that books are considered a really valuable object, right? Which you would worry about. Really, really interesting. A book is a valuable object, just like a kli, just like a utensil. And he must have lost these books or utensils because he says, Hamakir kelav, he sees them. So it sounds as though he's still looking for these books. In other words, he hasn't given up hope. He hasn't given up hope. And let's just hold on to that idea for a sec. He hasn't given up hope. Let's say a report of theft has gone out in town. So he's announced that these have been stolen. Yeshivas he's going to swear how much he paid, and he takes it. That is to say, this person, we're not accusing this person, by the way, of having stolen the object. I think the base assumption of the Mishnah is this person who's holding the books or utensils is not the thief, but nevertheless, he's got them. So he swears how much he paid, i.e., he bought them from someone else in the market, and he swears how much he paid for them. And then he takes it, i.e., the original owner takes it. So the original owner is going to get his goods back, but he's going to buy them back. He's going to buy them back from whoever has them now, and he's going to pay whatever price that individual paid in the market, i.e., from a social point of view, we are not going to, if you like, penalize that buyer for buying what turns out to have been stolen goods. And it's very interesting that according to the halakha, the original owner could have just taken them and walked off because ownership never did change hands. He never did give up hope of retrieving his books or his utensils. So he still retains title over those objects. But it seems as if that Mishnah, in order to make it possible for people to trade with one another in the market, and maybe, by the way, creating some kind of moral hazard, reducing the amount of care we take before we buy something in the market, the Mishnah is still compensating this person that essentially bought stolen property. That is, if reports had gone out. For im love, and if a report had not gone out in town that this object was stolen, lo hakol mimenu. Now, hakol here is a difficult word. I think it's from yachol, he cannot. If the report hadn't gone, he cannot, i.e., he can't take the object from him. Shani omer, perhaps we might say, macharan la'acher. Maybe he has sold them to another one. Maybe they were never stolen in the first place. Maybe this guy was short of cash and he's trying to raise cash and he sells his possessions. And then afterwards he has second thoughts, or maybe he gets rich and he wants his possessions back. So he claims that they were stolen and goes after them. But we have no evidence that they were stolen. We have no evidence. And so he doesn't have, if we have no evidence or no presupposition that they were stolen, he doesn't have the right to go out and compel someone who owns property to exchange that property for money. And the same kind of issue is going to apply if somebody sacrifices his property to help his friend. So in the third Mishnah, we've got someone who's essentially giving away property which was legally bought with some monetary compensation. And in the next Mishnah, the fourth Mishnah, we have someone who is allowing his property to go to waste. Let's look at the situation. Some guy came with a jar of wine. We're in the marketplace where he's got a jar of wine. And the other came with a jug of honey. And of course, we can already imagine from the earlier chapters, like what is going to happen here. We can already imagine what is going to go on. Well, they're going to bump into one another. And there seems to be no fault is applied. So, they're not running. They are taking care, but they bump into one another. So they bump into one another, or we presume that's what's happened. The jug of honey cracked. The wine spilt. So the jug's cracked. The jug of honey's cracked. Sorry, the wine is not spilt. The other guy actually poured out the wine and he saved the honey. He saved the honey by pouring it into his wine jug. And the Mishnah rules, really interestingly, he can claim no more than his wages. In other words, he's lost his wine, he's poured it out to save the honey, but he can't claim it. He's got no right to claim it because all he's really given is his time. Let's just keep going. Im amarlo atzil et shelach. If he said to him, I'll save yours. Ve'atanoten li demei sheli. I'll save yours and you give me the value of mine. At that point, chayav liten lo. At that point, he's obliged to give to him. In other words, if he makes the condition that he's pouring out the wine to save the honey, then at that point, the owner of the honey is obliged to pay the value of the wine. Now, this Mishnah has two parts. In fact, in the Kaufman manuscript, it's split into two Mishnayot, but the two parts are identical, or the two Mishnayot, if you like, in Kaufman are identical, except the second half deals with a flood. So a flood swept away this guy's donkey and that guy's donkey. So rather than a jug of wine and a jug of honey, we got two donkeys. And rather than crashing into one another, they are swept away by the river. But this is the same situation, or nearly the same situation. Shataf nahar chamoro v'chamor chavero. So the flood swept away his donkey and his friend's donkey. Shelo yafe maneh v'shel chavero matayim. His donkey was worth a maneh. That's 100 zuz. It's a fair amount of money. His friend's was worth 200. That's the base price of a ketubah. That's a lot of money. What did he do? V'hitzil et shel chavero ein lo ela scharo. And he left his own donkey. He left the 100 zuz donkey and he saved the 200 zuz donkey, but he can claim no more than his wages. Just like the guy who poured his wine out, who actively poured his wine out. In this case, this guy has passively lost the donkey. So they are slightly different situations. We see why the Mishnah brings both. But just like the guy who actively poured his wine out, the guy who passively left his donkey to drown can claim no more than his wages. And the Mishnah ends the same way. Im amarlo, if he had said to him, Atzil et sheach, I'll save your donkey. Ve'ata noten li demei sheli, I'll save your donkey and you give me the value of mine, which is a better outcome for both of them because the second donkey was worth twice as much as the first one. If he'd agreed that, chayav liten lo, he has to give it to her. But the bottom line in this Mishnah, or in these two Mishnayot, if you follow Kaufman and you say they're two separate Mishnayot, the bottom line is that we have to have an agreement. We can't take on liability without having an agreement. And of course, we've seen that very, very often in previous chapters in Bava Kama.